There comes a moment when you realize holding on is no longer strength. It's self-sabotage. The truth is, looking back only keeps you chained to a story that no longer deserves a sequel. And yet, so many people leave the door cracked open, replaying the what-ifs, checking his updates, hoping for closure that never comes. But the real power isn't in leaving half-heartedly. It's in walking away so completely that he has no place in your future, no echo in your mind, no grip on your heart. When you leave without looking back, you don't just erase him, you reclaim yourself. You stop living in the shadow of what was and step fully into the light of what's possible. That's where true freedom begins. The hardest part about leaving someone behind isn't the physical act of walking away. It's what happens in your mind after. You can block his number, delete the photos, and even cut all contact. But if you're still replaying the story in your head, he hasn't really left. Every memory you revisit, every time you check his social media, every time you wonder what he's doing or who he's with, you're keeping him alive in your life. That's the trick the mind plays. It convinces you that revisiting the past will give you closure, when in reality, it only chains you tighter to the very thing you're trying to escape. To truly leave without looking back, you have to stop feeding the memory. Think of it like a fire. A fire dies out when it's deprived of oxygen, but as long as you keep fanning it, it will burn endlessly. Memories are the same way. They lose their power when you stop giving them attention, when you starve them of energy, when you refuse to breathe life into them. And this isn't about pretending it never happened or denying your feelings. It's about choosing not to give your past a seat at the table of your present. Every time you open that door in your mind, you're allowing him to walk right back in, even if physically he's long gone. The dangerous part is how subtle this feeding can be. It can be as small as scrolling through old photos just one more time, or as simple as stalking his new posts to see if he looks happy. It might even feel harmless, like replaying your favorite memories or wondering how things could have been different. But all of these actions create one result. They keep him relevant. They keep you emotionally invested in someone who doesn't deserve the investment anymore. The longer you do it, the longer he lives rent, free in your head, dictating your emotions and stealing your focus from the life you could be living now. To stop feeding the memory, you need to starve the habits that keep it alive. That means resisting the urge to check up on him, no matter how strong the temptation. It means catching yourself when your mind drifts into highlight reels of the past and redirecting it toward the present. It means reminding yourself that nostalgia is a liar. It only shows you the good parts, never the whole truth of why you had to walk away. By cutting off these little leaks of energy, you slowly drain the power the memory has over you. Of course, this takes discipline. The mind loves patterns, and if your pattern for months or even years has been to think about him constantly, breaking that cycle won't happen overnight. But each time you resist the urge, you weaken the grip. It's like training a muscle at first. It feels impossible, but the more you practice, the stronger you get. And soon, the thoughts that once consumed you begin to fade, not because you forced them away, but because they no longer have fuel to survive. Here's the beautiful part. When you stop feeding the memory, you create space for something new. Your energy, once wasted on replaying a story that's over, becomes available for building the story ahead. Instead of scrolling through his life, you start creating your own. Instead of asking what he's doing, you ask what you can do for yourself today. That shift doesn't just weaken his place in your life, it strengthens yours, and over time, the absence of those old patterns becomes the evidence of your growth. Leaving without looking back isn't about erasing the past. It's about refusing to let it control you anymore. The memories will always exist, but they don't have to define you. They don't have to be a movie you play on repeat. You get to choose where your attention goes, and the moment you decide to starve the memory is the moment you finally begin to heal. Because he can't live in your present unless you keep feeding him with your thoughts. And when you stop, when you cut off the oxygen completely, he fades into exactly what he should be, a part of your past with no power over your future. When you leave someone behind, the temptation is to tell yourself a story that keeps you tied to the pain. You replay moments and think, I wasn't enough, or he left because of me. That narrative becomes the chain that keeps you looking back, because as long as you believe it, you'll be searching for validation that you were worthy all along. The truth is, the story you tell yourself about why it ended has more power over your healing than the ending itself. And that's why rewriting the narrative is so essential if you want to leave without looking back. You see, heartbreak doesn't just live in memories, it lives in meaning. The meaning you attach to the relationship is what shapes how you carry it forward. If the meaning is, I lost him, then every thought becomes about scarcity, about something missing from your life. If the meaning is, I was abandoned, then you walk away feeling powerless, like the ending was something done to you. But if you rewrite the narrative to, I outgrew this, everything shifts. Suddenly, leaving is not about loss, it's about evolution. It's not about being rejected. It's about choosing a higher standard for yourself. This doesn't mean lying to yourself or sugarcoating what happened. It means reframing the experience in a way that empowers you rather than weakens you. He didn't walk away because you weren't enough. He walked away because the relationship no longer matched the person you are becoming. He didn't reject you, life redirected you. You didn't lose someone, you gained clarity. That's the narrative that sets you free, because it positions you as the author of your story, not a character trapped in his. Think of it like this. Two people can live through the exact same breakup, but one says, he destroyed me, and the other says, he revealed me. The circumstances are the same, but the meaning changes everything. The first story keeps you stuck in victimhood. The second launches you into growth. That's the power of rewriting the narrative. You're not changing the facts, but you are reclaiming the interpretation. And interpretation is what determines whether you look back in pain or move forward in power. The mind loves to find evidence to support the story it tells. If you tell yourself you weren't enough, you'll start remembering every moment you doubted yourself in the relationship. But if you tell yourself you outgrew him, you'll start remembering every moment you compromised your standards, every time you felt unfulfilled, every red flag you ignored. And those memories will become reminders not of your weakness, but of your strength for finally walking away. Rewriting the narrative also stops you from glorifying the past. When you look back through the lens of loss, you only remember the highlights, the moments of connection that make you question why you left. But when you rewrite the story as one of growth, you start remembering the cracks, the compromises, the exhaustion of trying to make it work. And that perspective keeps you from idealizing what was never truly aligned with you. The more you affirm your new story, the more natural it becomes. At first, it might feel forced to say, I outgrew him, or this ending is a blessing. But over time, your mind will start to accept it as truth. And once it does, the pull to look back weakens. Because why would you long for something you've reframed as unworthy of who you are becoming? That's when you know the narrative has shifted, not because the facts changed, but because your perspective did. Leaving without looking back is less about erasing him and more about redefining what he meant in your life. Was he the love of your life that slipped away, or was he the stepping stone that taught you what real love should look like? That choice of meaning is entirely yours, and the moment you choose the narrative that honors your growth, you cut the cord to the past. He stops being the chapter you mourn and becomes the chapter that set the stage for your next, greater one. That's the freedom of rewriting the story. You don't just leave him behind, you leave behind the version of yourself that thought you needed him. One of the biggest mistakes people make after a breakup is filling the silence with noise. They rush to replace the void, distracting themselves with anything that keeps them from feeling the weight of loss. But the truth is, healing doesn't come from avoidance, it comes from creating new meaning in the space that was left behind. When you leave without looking back, the key is not just cutting ties with him, but intentionally building a life so rich, so full, that his absence no longer feels like a hole, it feels like freedom. This is where you shift from reaction to creation. Instead of reacting to the breakup by numbing yourself or chasing distractions, you begin creating new routines, new passions, new moments of joy that have nothing to do with him. Because let's be honest, so much of your life may have been shaped around him. The places you went, the shows you watched, the songs you listened to, all of them were colored by his presence. If you leave that vacuum empty, your mind will keep drifting back to fill it with memories of him. But if you actively replace those associations with new experiences, you're teaching your brain a new story, one where he is no longer the reference point. Think of it like redecorating a room. If you move out of a place but leave it filled with the old furniture, it will always remind you of what used to be. But if you strip it down and bring in something fresh, suddenly the space feels like yours again. That's what you must do with your life, right? Decorate it with new habits, new friends, new goals. Don't sit in the empty space of what you lost. Design a space for who you're becoming. This process doesn't have to be dramatic. It can start with small, intentional choices. Maybe you try a new coffee shop instead of the one you always went to together. Maybe you sign up for a class you've always wanted but never had time for. Maybe you travel to a place you've never been, even if it's just a day trip to a nearby city. Each new experience rewires your brain, creating fresh connections that anchor you in the present instead of pulling you back into the past. The beauty of this approach is that it shifts the focus from what you've lost to what you're gaining. You stop obsessing over the door that closed and start getting excited about the doors you're opening. And here's the thing, when you immerse yourself in creating new meaning, you stop seeing yourself as the person who was left behind, and you start seeing yourself as the person who is moving forward. That shift in identity is everything, because once you begin to see yourself as someone thriving without him, looking back feels less and less appealing. Of course, there will be moments when the old memories try to creep in. That's normal. But when they do, you can ask yourself, what new meaning can I create right now? Maybe that means calling a friend, writing in a journal, or diving into a project that excites you. Over time, these new patterns become your default, and the old ones lose their grip. What once felt like a loss begins to feel like a gift, the gift of rediscovering yourself, of building a life that doesn't just distract from pain, but elevates your sense of purpose. When you create new meaning, you stop defining yourself by the story of a relationship and start defining yourself by the story of your growth. You are no longer someone who lost love. You are someone who is building love in new places, whether that's in your passions, your friendships, or eventually in a new partner who is truly aligned with you. And the best part, you don't just leave him behind. You rise so far above that his memory doesn't even fit into the life you've created. That's the ultimate way to leave without looking back, not by erasing the past, but by building a future so meaningful that you wouldn't trade it for anything you left behind. When you decide to leave without looking back, one of the most powerful tools you have is boundaries. Boundaries are the invisible lines that protect your peace, your energy, and your progress. Without them, you'll find yourself slipping into old patterns, giving him access to your life in subtle ways that keep you tethered. It doesn't always happen through dramatic encounters. Sometimes it's as small as responding to a late night message, answering a phone call, or agreeing to meet just to talk. Each time you cross that boundary, you reopen the wound, and suddenly all the work you've done to move forward feels undone. That's why creating firm boundaries isn't just about keeping him out. It's about keeping yourself safe from the parts of you that are tempted to let him back in. Boundaries start with clarity. You need to be brutally honest with yourself about what keeps you stuck. If seeing his posts triggers you, then unfollow or block him. If mutual friends constantly bring him up, then tell them kindly but firmly that you don't want updates. If you know he's likely to reach out, prepare your response ahead of time, even if that response is silence. Boundaries are not about punishing him, they're about protecting you. They're about recognizing that your healing is too precious to risk for a fleeting moment of attention or false closure. But here's the real challenge. Boundaries don't just exist with him, they also exist with yourself. Because let's face it, sometimes you are the one crossing your own lines. You say you won't check his social media, but then you find yourself scrolling. You promise not to dwell on old conversations, but then you replay them in your head at night. This is where self-discipline becomes your best ally. Every time you catch yourself crossing a boundary you set for yourself, you have an opportunity to strengthen your self-respect by pulling yourself back. It's not about being perfect. It's about being committed to protecting your future more than indulging your past. Setting boundaries can feel harsh at first, especially if part of you still craves connection. You might tell yourself, it's harmless, just one reply, or it doesn't mean anything if I check. But those small lapses are what keep the cycle alive. Healing doesn't happen when you dabble in half measures. It happens when you decide that your peace is non-negotiable. Think of it like sealing a wound. If you keep picking at it, it will never close. But if you cover it, protect it, and give it space, it heals stronger than before. The beautiful part is that boundaries, once established, create a ripple effect in every area of your life. When you learn to say no to the person who doesn't deserve access to you anymore, you also strengthen the muscle of saying no to anything that compromises your worth. You start to carry yourself differently, knowing that you have the power to protect your energy. And that kind of self-respect doesn't just help you leave the past behind. It sets the tone for every relationship you build in the future. Over time, those boundaries stop feeling like restrictions and start feeling like freedom. They are not walls that trap you. They are gates that keep out what doesn't belong. They remind you daily that moving forward is a choice you make, not a hope you hold. And the more consistent you are with them, the faster the past fades into the background. The calls stop coming, the thoughts lose their grip, and you find yourself no longer tempted to look back. Because you've built a system that makes looking back impossible. Ultimately, boundaries are not about him, they're about you. They are proof that you value yourself enough to protect your progress, proof that you care more about where you're going than where you've been. When you stand firm in your boundaries, you're not just leaving him behind. You're leaving behind the version of yourself that tolerated what didn't serve you. And that's the real victory. Not only do you erase his influence, but you also rewrite the way you show up for yourself. And once you've done that, there is nothing left to look back at, only forward toward the life you deserve. One of the most overlooked parts of leaving without looking back is learning how to reclaim your identity. When you're in a relationship, especially one that takes up a big part of your emotional world, it's easy to blur the lines between who you are and who you are with him. You start defining yourself through his eyes, what he thought of you, how he treated you, what role you played in his life. And when that relationship ends, you can feel like a part of you ended with it. That's why so many people struggle to let go. They're not just losing him, they're losing the version of themselves they built around him. But the truth is, Your identity was never meant to be borrowed. It was always yours to claim, and now is the moment to take it back. Think about the subtle ways this happens. Maybe you adjusted your likes and dislikes to fit his. You listened to his music, went along with his plans, watched the shows he liked, or even adopted his language and phrases. Over time, those small shifts start to erode the edges of who you really are. So when he's gone, you're left with gaps, spaces where his influence used to be. And unless you consciously fill those gaps with your own choices, your own passions, your own values, you'll keep feeling like something is missing. But that something isn't him, it's you. It's the parts of yourself you neglected while you were busy prioritizing him. Reclaiming your identity is about remembering what lights you up when no one else is in the room. It's about asking yourself, what do I love? What makes me feel alive? What kind of life do I want to design for myself? These questions might feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you've spent a long time centering your world around someone else. But the answers are the keys to your freedom. Each time you rediscover something that is purely yours, a hobby, a passion, a goal, you are piecing yourself back together in a way that makes you whole again. It's not just about hobbies or interests, though. It's about values. Relationships have a way of testing your boundaries and bending your standards. Maybe you tolerated behavior you never thought you would, just to keep the peace. Maybe you compromised on dreams because you didn't want to outgrow him. Reclaiming your identity means drawing those lines back in the sand. It's saying, this is who I am, and this is what I stand for, without apology. It's realizing that you don't need to shrink, mold, or dilute yourself to be loved. You don't need to twist yourself into someone else's vision. You are allowed to be fully you, and the right people will meet you there. As you begin this process, something powerful happens. The grip of the past loosens. You stop defining yourself as the person who was left or the person who lost someone. Instead, you start defining yourself as the person who is rediscovering her power, her worth, her individuality. And when you stand in that identity, looking back feels irrelevant because you're too busy looking inward and forward. You no longer see the relationship as the thing that gave you value. You see it as the thing that reminded you how much value you already had. This is the beauty of reclaiming your identity. It doesn't just help you let go, it transforms you. It gives you confidence that doesn't depend on anyone else. It makes you resilient because no matter what happens in the future, you know you can always return to yourself. And it makes you magnetic because nothing is more attractive than someone who is fully grounded in who they are. The truth is, leaving without looking back isn't about pretending he never existed. It's about making sure that his existence no longer defines who you are. It's about stepping into the version of yourself that feels whole, powerful, and authentic, regardless of who's by your side. And once you've reclaimed your identity, you'll realize something profound. You never needed him to complete you. You just needed to remember that you were complete all along. When you finally decide to leave without looking back, the last piece of the puzzle is trusting life, trusting the process, trusting that what you let go of was never meant to carry you into the future you deserve. The hardest thing about walking away isn't the leaving itself, it's the uncertainty that follows. Questions creep in. What if I never find someone better? What if I made a mistake? What if he changes for someone else? Those questions are the hooks that drag you back toward the past, keeping you anchored to a story that has already ended. But when you choose to trust, you release those hooks. You stop demanding certainty and start leaning into the belief that life has a way of aligning you with what's right when you create the space for it. Trust is not passive. It doesn't mean sitting around waiting for someone to show up and prove your decision was right. It means actively believing that your choice to leave was an act of self-respect, and that self-respect always pays off. It means reminding yourself that endings are not punishments, they are redirections. You may not see it now, but every time you've been forced to let go of something that wasn't right, something better eventually appeared. And the same will happen here if you don't sabotage it by running back to what you know just because it feels familiar. The truth is, the fear of the unknown is often stronger than the pain of what's wrong. That's why people go back. They would rather stay in something that hurts than step into something uncertain. But here's what you need to hold on to. Uncertainty is not emptiness, it's possibility. The blank space you're afraid of is the canvas where your new life will be painted. If you fill it with the same old story, you'll never get to see the masterpiece waiting for you. Trusting the process is about embracing that blank space with courage, letting it be uncomfortable without rushing to cover it up. This trust also extends to yourself. You have to believe that you are capable of building a life that doesn't just survive without him, but thrives. You have to believe that you are strong enough to carry yourself through the lonely moments, wise enough to learn from the past, and worthy enough to attract the kind of love that doesn't make you question your value. Without that self-trust, you'll always be tempted to go back because you'll convince yourself that he was the best you could get. But when you truly believe in your own worth, you realize that leaving him wasn't the end of love. It was the beginning of the kind of love you actually deserve. Over time, this trust grows stronger. The more you lean into it, the more evidence you gather that life is on your side. You'll notice that opportunities arise, people show up, doors open, things you never would have seen if you were still staring backward. And slowly, you'll understand that looking back was never about love, it was about fear. Once you choose trust over fear, you stop asking, "What if I lost something great?" and start asking, "What if I'm about to gain something extraordinary?" Leaving without looking back is ultimately an act of faith. Faith in life, faith in timing, faith in yourself. You don't need to know exactly what's ahead to know that it's better than what you left behind, because what you left behind already showed you it wasn't enough. Trust is what allows you to close the chapter fully, without rereading it, without clinging to the idea of what could have been. It's what gives you the strength to put the book down entirely and reach for a new one. And when you do, but when you speak to yourself with kindness, just leave him, you create safety. When you finally decide to leave without looking back, it isn't about pretending he never existed, it's about deciding he no longer gets to exist in your present or your future. It's about understanding that your story is too valuable to be defined by someone who didn't know how to hold it. Walking away is not weakness, it's strength in its purest form. It's saying, "I choose myself, I choose peace, I choose possibility," and the moment you do, everything begins to shift. The memories lose their weight, the pain starts to fade, and the version of you who once clung to him starts to transform into the version of you who doesn't need him at all. The real beauty of leaving without looking back is that it frees you, not just from him, but from the cycle of doubt, from the story that said you weren't enough, from the fear that you'll never find. Better you leave, and in leaving, you make room for the love you truly deserve. Love that won't require you to shrink, to beg, to question yourself. And even before that love arrives, you discover something even more powerful. The love you've been searching for has been inside you all along. So walk away, not with bitterness but with grace, not with fear but with trust, because the past was never meant to be your prison, it was only meant to be your teacher. And once you've learned, you don't go back to the classroom, you graduate. This is your graduation moment. Close the book, step forward, and never look back. The best of your life is waiting, and it begins the second you decide to walk toward it without turning around.